I came to a quick realization that there are three things that I would have to investigate if I were going to look into the Christian message. And those three things are, number one, whether Christ is Lord; number two, whether He died on the cross; and number three, whether He rose from the dead. I got this from Romans chapter 10, verse 9, where Paul says, if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised Him, resurrection, from the dead, death on the cross, then you will be saved. Death, deity, resurrection. If Jesus died on the cross for our sins and rose from the dead to prove what He said, which is that He is God, then Christianity is true. And so we started looking into these things. And I came up with a quick conclusion about the New Testament. And by quick, I mean it took me a year. But I figured out that the New Testament is truly accurate to what it originally said. If you study the history of the New Testament, you study the manuscripts, and you take a look at the evidence that we have, what they say today is what they have always said. Well, I turned to David and I said, all right, David, we have the New Testament message here. It's still accurate to what it says, but it doesn't look like Jesus claims to be God anywhere in there. Where does He claim to be God? It took me a while, but I began to realize that when I read the New Testament the way it's supposed to be read, from the perspective of those who understand the Old Testament, then Jesus very clearly claims to be God. I didn't want to go to John. Most people said, look at John. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld His glory, glory of the only begotten. Look, clearly Jesus is claiming to be God here. Well, number one, no, it's not Jesus talking, that's John talking. But number two, that's the Gospel of John. That's really, really late. I want to look at the beginnings of Christianity. I want to see how, from the very first part of the Christian message, Jesus is proclaimed as God. And so I went to the first Gospel, the Gospel of Mark. And it was precisely there where I read Mark chapter 14, verse 62, which when I understood what that verse was, it blew my mind. Here Jesus claims to be the Son of Man from Daniel. He claims to be the I Am from Exodus. And He claims to be the one sitting at the right hand of the power from Psalms 110, verse 1. Jesus very clearly claims to be God in Mark chapter 14, verse 62, when you understand its context. And so I said, all right, fine. Well, how do we know He died on the cross? Did He actually die on the cross? Because the Quran told me Jesus did not die on the cross. The Quran says in chapter 4, verse 157, وَمَا قَتَلُوهُ وَمَا صَلَبُوهُ. We killed Him not, nor did they crucify Him, but so it was made to appear to them. So as a Muslim, I believed what the Quran told me. Jesus did not die on the cross. But Christians think Jesus certainly died on the cross. So this was a good litmus test right here. Which one's true? Which one's false? So I said, I'm going to study Jesus' death on the cross from a historical perspective. I want to see, did He actually die on the cross? And no matter how you look at it, whether you're an atheist, agnostic, Jew, Buddhist, however you look at it, if you're a historian and you're studying the evidence of Jesus' life, you have to conclude that He died on the cross. Every scholar who studies Jesus' life concludes that Jesus died on the cross. In fact, what they say is that if we can know anything about Jesus' life, it's that we know He died on the cross under Pontius Pilate. And the third thing, the issue of the resurrection, did Jesus rise from the dead? Again, if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, the Christian faith is in vain. So how can I know whether Jesus rose from the dead? Well, as luck would have it, God brought to town a debate. It was a debate on whether Jesus rose from the dead. It was between a Christian named Michael Licona and a Muslim, Shabir Ali, both very respected in their fields. And as I was watching the debate, I was still a Muslim. As I was watching the debate, I concluded that the Christian case was far stronger. And I'm not the only one who concludes that. The argument that he uses, the minimal facts argument, an atheist by the name of Michael Martin, he's a very well-known atheist philosopher, says that the minimal facts defense for the resurrection is the strongest defense for the resurrection that has ever been provided in history. And so I stepped away from the evidence. I said, let me back it up. What I believe truly does matter. I want it to be true. Let me take a look at this. I began to realize that the case for Christianity was very, very strong.